Susan Tiny from Empowered Women Faith Club. Thank you so much for watching this video today. If this is your first time on our YouTube channel, please subscribe so you can continue to receive all the updates about our new videos when they become available. Well, we are continuing our series called Awaken, Encounters with the God Who Speaks, and this is week 4. And today we're going to be talking about how do you position yourself to hear from God. Last week we highlighted 3 things about discerning and recognizing the voice of God. Number 1, we have to be in a relationship with God through Jesus Christ. Number 2, we have to spend time reading the Word of God because God speaks to us through His Word. And number 3, we have to be eager and expecting to hear from God because we would only recognize or discern God's voice when we're expecting to hear from Him. And so this week we're going to talk about how do we position ourselves to hear from God, because it matters how we posture ourselves to hear the voice of God. Not necessarily physical posture, but also the posture of our hearts. And we're going to read from a prophet who positioned himself to hear from God and to learn how he did that. Habakkuk is a prophet in the Old Testament who positioned himself to hear from God. A little background about the prophet Habakkuk. Now, Habakkuk was a prophet who debated with God. He had some questions. He wrestled with some questions and struggled to understand how God worked. He lived in the nation of Judah, and at the time they were faced with a great devastation. And Habakkuk questioned and debated and wrestled to understand why a just God would allow such injustice to prevail or allow the wicked to prosper, or why it seemed that evil was prevailing. And we have the same questions about our times now. I believe that we can really relate to Habakkuk's concerns. And so Habakkuk brought his concerns before God, and then he positioned himself to hear from God. So he was expectant, he was waiting to hear what God would say about his concerns. So in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 1, he says, I will take my stand at my watch post and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. Habakkuk was waiting to hear from God, and so he goes to the highest place of his house, the watchtower, where watchmen would typically stand to watch over a city and watch over an area to make sure that there wasn't any activities that were going on that were not supposed to be happening. Habakkuk positioned himself there, away from all the noise, away from all the distractions, away from anything that would hinder him from hearing from God. Here are 3 thoughts I want to leave with you today. Habakkuk eventually did hear from God. God responded to Habakkuk because he was expectant. In Habakkuk 2, verse 2, it says, and the Lord answered me, write the vision, make it plain on tablet so that he may run who reads it. Another version I really love, in the New International Reader's Version, says it very simply. Write down the message I am giving you. Write it clearly on the tablets you use. Then a messenger can read it and run to announce it. So Habakkuk was ready in position to hear the voice of God, and the Lord responded and told him to write down the message that he was going to give him. So when we position ourselves to hear from God, he speaks and we recognize and we know that he's speaking. And we should write down what he says to us. So here are 3 thoughts I want you to take away from this video about positioning ourselves to hear from God. Number 1, we have to create time. We have to be intentional about the time that we create. Carving out quiet time, personal time to be with God, to spend with God, to sit with him every day. Because if we don't make the time, we will never have the time. And we have to guard the time that we have with the Lord. So creating that time is so important if we want to hear the voice of God leading and guiding us every day. Number 2, we have to make space. Make room for God in our life. God is not going to invade our lives if we don't make room for him. We have to create the space for God to meet with us every day. Whether we wake up early in the morning or late at night, or a prayer walk, or take a trip to a prayer mountain, whatever it is that works best for you to meet with God. And it doesn't have to be a perfect place or a perfect space. It could be that your only space that you could meet with God is in your closet because you live with kids just like me, surrounded by little kids, and the noise level is always so loud. So there's never a dull moment. There's never a time to be quiet unless we go hide somewhere. That's your space to get away from all the noise and the distraction to hear from God. And in the words of Mother Teresa, I love what this quote says. Listen, because if your heart is full of other things, you cannot hear the voice of God. Number 3, you have to have your spiritual radar up and waiting and expectant to hear from God. Just like the prophet Habakkuk, he positioned himself in a high tower and he was waiting and he was expecting to hear from God. So we have to position ourselves, position your heart, the posture of your heart, expecting, eager, listening, leaning in, and waiting to hear from God. I talked about last week my adventure and encounter with God in the Moravian Prayer Mountains that I'd never been to before, but I felt led to go to the Moravian Falls Prayer Mountain, and I was awestruck by how God confirmed along the way all the signs that I'd seen during my prayer walks, that he was literally leading me to the Moravian Falls Prayer Mountain. Now, my first time at the Moravian Falls Prayer Mountain was unlike any other experience I've ever had. It was such a peaceful and calmness in the atmosphere of that prayer mountain that it was so heavenly. I can't describe it. All of my thoughts were completely silenced as soon as I got to the prayer mountain, and I just couldn't do anything else but sit there and worship. That's all I could do. For several hours, I sat there and worshiped with song after song after song. And the songs just kept coming and coming and coming as if someone was leading me into worship. Worshiping and worshiping, I couldn't stop worshiping. I just simply sat there and enjoyed the presence of God. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I can't explain it. You will have to experience it to really understand it. But there was such a heavenly act. And that's where I began to hear the voice of God with such clarity like I've never heard before. He spoke and I heard with such clarity because all of the noise and all of the distractions were all silenced so that I could hear his voice with clarity. The songs that came up, and I sang songs that I had not sang in years, but the songs were so perfectly chosen for that divine moment in his presence. And I knew that there was such a unique presence and atmosphere about that prayer mountain. And I didn't realize where I really was until I began to encounter and meet other people who came across from other states to be at the prayer mountain. I met people from California and Kansas and Boston and many other states who made their way across different states to be at the prayer mountain. That's when I realized that maybe I didn't really know where God had led me. And so I read a little bit about the prayer mountain, and I realized that it had such a rich history of over 100 years of 24-hour prayer by the Moravians. That is amazing. That's incredible. And that's why the atmosphere of that prayer mountain is so heavy with the presence of God. And so many angelic visitations and encounters that have been recorded at that prayer mountain. But one of the ladies that I've spoken and met whose encounters with God and angelic visitations have so touched me is Anna Roundtree. And she's a prophetess who lives on the prayer mountain. And Anna has recorded so many visions of angelic encounters and encounters with God in her blog, or on her blog, AnnaRoundtree.com. And in her most recent book called Heaven Awaits the Bride, she gives us some very insightful revelations about her encounters with God and angelic visitations as well. So check it out, AnnaRoundtree.com, and you're going to be blown away by the visions of angelic encounters that she's had. I'm going to end there for this week, and next week I'm going to share a divine encounter that I had personally that could not have been orchestrated by anyone but God himself. I want you to tune in next. Thank you so much. I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye. Have a good day. Bye.